Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to Newnham's virtual Festival of Art, Science and Ideas, and to this particular event, Women and Words, in which we're going to be talking about the heady days of feminist publishing in the 1970s and 80s. And it's my very great pleasure to introduce today's speakers, both of whom are frontline veterans of this particular battle, Sarah Lefanu and Jill Nichols. Sarah Lefanu read history, I think that's right, at Newnham.
No, English.
Oh, you're English as well. Okay. Read English at Newnham in the early 70s. And in 1980, she joined the feminist publishing house, The Women's Press, and was a senior editor there throughout the 80s, helping to publish iconic works such as The Female Man by Joanna Russ, The Colour Purple by Alice Walker, and one of my own favourites, The Subversive Stitch by Rosika Parker. Sarah is herself a highly respected author and has published 6 books, including an exploration of feminism and science fiction, and acclaimed biographies of Rose Macaulay and Samora Machel, the first president of Mozambique, and a triple biography of Kipling, Kingsley, and Conan Doyle, something of themselves. And if you're into film, and frankly, who isn't these days, Sarah also writes a fabulous blog, Film Watching Women. Jill Nichols, who also read English at Newnham from 1971 to 1974, and from Cambridge joined the groundbreaking feminist magazine Spare Rib. I wasn't making it up when I said they're absolute veterans, leading veterans in this battle. Joined Spare Rib, where she worked from 1974 to 1981. And Jill was then also closely involved with setting up the independent small feminist press Sheba Publishing. Since 1983, she's worked in television, producing a formidable string of brilliant documentaries on, to name just a few, Toni Morrison, Georgia O'Keeffe, Diane Athill, Nawal El-Saadawi, Vivian Maier, Doris Lessing, Louise Bourgeois, and Tammy Wynette. And those are just the women. So welcome, Jill and Sarah. I wanted to start by actually talking about your time at Cambridge, if that's okay, because you became close friends while you were at Newnham during your undergraduate years. In fact, we've got a fantastic photograph of you both, which I think we should share right away. But while we're waiting for that photograph to appear, oh, here it is. I hope you can all see it now. And Sarah is on the left as you're looking at the screen, so you can see Sarah's face, and Jill is standing right beside her. So, I mean, it's such a beautiful photograph. I mean, in terms of the moment in time, but also your kind of affection for one another, and you look like you're having tremendous fun. Do you remember how you actually first met and where and when?
Well, maybe can I just say something about the photo first?
Please do.
I mean, it really does express that kind of joie de vivre that I do remember. And the close friendship that Jill and I had. But actually that photo also we put into the first edition of Granta that we co-edited. I'm pretty sure it must have been in our second year. I can't remember how many issues we brought out, and I don't actually remember it as being, I don't remember that I'm speaking for myself here, not for Jill. I think that I was terribly inexperienced. Well, I was completely inexperienced as an editor, as a magazine editor. But we did it, and that photo was on the inside cover, I seem to remember. So we were good friends by then to actually be co-editing Granta magazine together.
Yeah, and as well as Granta, I don't know what year it was, but I was involved in a magazine that we called Red Stockings, which was, Granta was obviously a literary magazine, and we had lots of women contributors, but it wasn't specifically feminist at all, was it, as far as I remember. But Red Stockings was a magazine that we produced in the Student Union building in the middle of town, and I suppose sold or gave away, I forget now. So we had I had those 2 experiences of publishing things when I was at Cambridge, and got quite involved in the women's movement at that time, I suppose. I remember the very first few weeks I was in Cambridge, there was a sort of post-68, it was actually 71, but I suppose we're a bit behind the times, sit-in at the Senate House in the middle of town, and there was a huge banner, hand-painted banner up on the Senate House saying, "The revolution is here, we have transcended individual consciousness." And I was quite intrigued by that. I remember my dad came to visit in the first few weeks that I was at Newnham, and we walked past the Senate House with that great big banner up, and he asked me what it meant and why I was interested. And we went to the Whip or whatever it was called, the tea shop opposite Trinity to have a cup of tea. And then I probably went back to the sit-in. It was very kind of play power and also lefty politics, and the feminist movement, as I knew it in Cambridge, sort of came out of meeting people through that, as well as at Newnham.
So you both dodged the question how you two actually met.
Oh yes, I think it was at the first. Okay, well, we both did English at Newnham, so we met in the first get together. Was Sarah?
So we met in Jean Gooder's room, I think, probably, or Nita Narasimhan's room, or both of them, probably. You know, our first day or night, I think.
Yeah.
And, yeah, I mean, in fact, Jill, I wasn't involved in all those exciting political sit-in type things that you were. I seem to remember. I was kind of more quiet and in the background. But but one of the other things that I remember you and I doing, and maybe you've completely forgotten this or probably repressed the memory, was that after we'd been studying Malory, the Morte d'Arthur, I wrote. Oh God, I feel slightly embarrassed about this, but I wrote a play that was then put on in King's Cellars. And do you remember? And you played, there was the woman, there was the man and the woman. I don't think they had names. And the woman had to appear in various guises. And I allowed something like kind of, being very inexperienced at that as well, I allowed like kind of 4 seconds between scenes. And I remember you heroically rushing off and changing from, you know, your kind of long Arthurian gown into something more modern and then rushing back on again and then having to rush off again. And I think that was our second year too, or possibly the end of our first year.
And we even had an audience.
Anyway, we had fun together.
Did Cambridge make you into feminists, or did you arrive at Newnham fully formed radicals?
I had been a bit aware of it before I came to Cambridge because I had a year off between taking the entrance exams and doing the interviews and all that. And I was in Paris for a little while teaching English and learning French. And there was a lot of women's movement activity there that I noticed and read about a bit. But I wasn't involved in anything until I came to Cambridge, when I got into doing sort of street theatre in the Market Square about housework, and not I knew much about housework. And we used to invade men's colleges and at Hall and go around with penny whistles and balloons and things saying that they should take women in the colleges. Because the year that Sarah and I were there was the last year where girls had to go to women's colleges. There was no choice. The following year, 72, King's started to take women.
I was really struck by that when you told me that when we spoke a couple of days ago, because I arrived at Newnham in 1982, and I had no idea that mixed colleges were such a new thing.
Yeah.
I assumed that would have been happening. I mean, really, it's extraordinary. Just 10 years earlier,
you made
the last cohort going into a single-sex environment completely.
And I think if there had been mixed colleges that I could have gone to, I probably would have chosen one because I'd been to a mixed state school. So I was very lucky, really, that I had to go to Newnham because it was great. And it's a great place to be at that time too.
It says something about just how much changed in that decade, in the 70s. I mean, it really was a kind of quite different world by 1982 than it had been in 1971. I wondered, before we kind of talk about specifically about publishing, I wanted to ask you whether you had a sense of being, on a wave of change, that you were making history, because there's no doubt about it that the 70s generation was hugely influential for women of my age and younger. Were you aware of that at the time? What was your sense of where you were at as women, where we were at as women?
I don't think that I was aware of that while I was at Newnham at all. And I do remember that those women who went to King's and to Clare in our second year and our third year, I think we kind of looked at them as if they were kind of slightly strange. And I seem to remember that quite a lot of them found it very hard being in a man's college. And a number of them really liked to be friends with us women at Newnham. I mean, I think that some of them looked to us for a place, where things were a bit easier, perhaps, where friendships were a bit easier and perhaps were a little bit envious. I mean, that's kind of how I remember it anyway. I mean, what I got from Newnham actually was a sense of the importance of friendship rather than anything else. And I certainly wasn't radicalised before I came, and wasn't even really radicalised at Newnham. I mean, things happened to me afterwards.
Well, I think I was conscious that it was the beginning of something quite important. Well, it had already started, obviously, before 71, but the women's movement, that is, things had started happening in Britain a couple of years before that. But I was aware it was a new and important movement that I really wanted to be part of, definitely. And as soon as I left university, that's what I did.
Well, that's right. So you went straight into Spare Rib, didn't you, after leaving Cambridge? Was there any gap at all? Or how did that happen?
A short gap. I went to Portugal on a summer holiday, and that was great with some other women. And then I got a job as a van driver, and I did that for a few months. And I've often thought that was the most successful feminist thing I've ever done, because while I was there, when I arrived, the women van drivers were getting £17.94 a week, and the men were getting £23. And I sort of organised a equal pay dispute and got women equal pay to the men. I say got, it sounds a bit egotistical, but it's really just because I found out that the other women would really appreciate it. I mean, we're interested. And then I went to see the boss, and the boss gave in. So we didn't have to demonstrate in the street or anything. He could see that it wasn't fair, and agreed to give the women equal pay. The argument was that we drove smaller vans, and I argued that we'd be quite happy to drive bigger vans, and that anyway, small and big vans both did the same job. So,
yeah. I mean, it's amazing, isn't it, that we're still having these battles about equal pay 30 years later. Still, that particular battle still hasn't been completely won by any means. So.
It was the equal pay for work of equal value argument, and I could argue that we all did work of equal value. And he saw my point and gave in, which was amazing. And then I started at Spare Rib
So how did you get to Spare Rib? I mean, presumably there were quite a lot of people who wanted to work for Spare Rib in those days.
Yes, there was actually nepotism, I suppose, but there was a woman who'd been at Cambridge, although I didn't know her. I didn't know her then. She was at Girton, but she knew me, I think, through what we used to call the Town Women's Group that I sometimes went to, because we were very conscious of town and gown, and the Town Women's Group had more mothers in it and different issues from student issues, and that was very interesting. And I think she asked me to come along and help her. She was editing the news at Spare Rib. And I came and did the a thing called Shortlist, which was a list of what's on a page within the magazine. And I did that and worked in a further education college for a while, teaching English and social studies and general studies. Because although the van drivers went up to £23 a week at that time, I think at Spare Rib we were paying ourselves maximum £14 a week, because it was a self-financing magazine and we didn't have a lot of money, so we couldn't pay ourselves more than the magazine made. So it was terrible pay.
I mean, so for anyone who doesn't know, I mean, Spare Rib was founded in 1972 by Marcia Rowe and Rosie Boycott, and it ran for 21 years until 1993. And it was really, you can't really, in terms of kind of the fight for women's rights, you can't really think of anything more groundbreaking than Spare Rib, more iconic than Spare Rib, really. It really stood for that kind of the bravest, boldest, most provocative element of the women's liberation movement in England at that time in the 70s, and really right through the 80s as well. I remember when I was a journalist on Fleet Street in the 80s, I mean, working with Rosie Boycott, in fact, but I mean, still, Spare Rib was still a touchstone for sort of radical feminism. And again, I just wanted to ask you, whether how far you were, again, aware of that, aware of being part of something extraordinary, important, cutting edge.
I think we were, but I just wanted to say that it wasn't the most radical publication in feminism, because we printed it on glossy paper. The ideology of it was that it was meant to be a newsstand magazine. We wanted it on the newsstands next to Cosmopolitan and the other magazines women might pick up, so that women who weren't in the women's movement could pick it up, find something that related to them and buy it. And some women in the women's movement were quite sarky about it at the time. I remember there were banners saying "spare tit" and things like that. It was a bit of a joke for some people. There were being much more accepted, but when it started, I think some women thought it wasn't radical enough, that's for sure.
But that was quite deliberate, wasn't it? That was a deliberate policy to make it look like a women's magazine. I mean, it was a kind of the idea of subverting from within.
And also Marsha, who started it, had started it with Rosie. She had worked in, she was Australian, and she'd worked on Australian Vogue as a secretary. So she was interested in women's magazines, but also conscious of not wanting to work in a hierarchy like that ever again. And she'd also worked on the underground press, on Oz and Black Dwarf and things like that, and had been excited by it, felt very empowered by it in terms of being able to start your own magazine. You know, it's quite a brave thing to do, and sort of it made her feel that she could, because the underground press was all doing that, starting magazines with no money. But also she found a lot of sexism in the underground, so she wanted something that was specifically feminist.
Can you give us any kind of flavour of what a typical day on Spare Rib was like? Circa 1976, I don't know.
Lots of meetings, lots of discussions. When the magazine started, it was a limited company, and it became a cooperative later. And when it started, it had an editorial structure. Marsha and Rosie, I think, were editors the first year, and then Rosie moved on, and Marsha was editor, and other people had designated roles like news editor, music editor, advertising, and then we tried to run it as a collective. And so we had to have millions of meetings because everything had to be decided collectively.
Was there a lot of disagreements?
Yes. And we didn't exactly have job titles anymore, but there was an acknowledgement that some people were better at some things than others. And I'd had quite a lot of experience at editing and writing. So I did a lot of the news writing and some of the features editing. And
Michelle Roberts, the poetry editor, wasn't she?
Yes, she was. Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
In terms of sort of being a voice for feminists in that moment in time, that decade, what did you feel was the kind of the most important things for you to get across? What were your driving kind of concerns and passions at that point? What seemed really crucial?
I was doing a lot of the news, so I thought it was very important to get things about women who wouldn't necessarily define themselves as feminists, but who were doing interesting, exciting, radical, newsworthy things, both in Britain and around the world. We had a lot of international coverage, but we always thought it was very important to have articles about sexuality and about our bodies, about health. There was quite a lot about psychotherapy, actually, and quite a few people who worked there went on to become psychotherapists, interestingly. Not so many went into journalism. I was unusual. But while I was there, I'm talking too much and Sarah's not getting a word in. While I was there, I did quite a lot of journalism. I shared a column on The Guardian with a friend, and I worked for a lot of mainstream women's magazines. I did problem pages for a long time, which was quite good fun. And that was partly to boost this Spare Rib tiny income, and partly the outreach kind of mentality.
Spare Rib finally closed in 1993, or folded. I don't know quite the right expression, but it is still available, isn't it?
Yes, it was. I think 2016, there was a wonderful project from the British Library to digitise the whole of Spare Rib, which I got quite involved with helping with. Unfortunately, we never clarified copyright at the time that we were doing it. We never thought about it. So we had a lot of problems with copyright. And so when you go to it on the British Library site, which is still well worth doing, there's a lot of holes where things couldn't be included because they weren't cleared. And that's got even more complicated with Brexit and leaving the EU. But you can still get hard copies of the magazine in the British Library, but also in lots of other libraries around Britain, probably in Cambridge too. So, yeah, great. People could go and have a look and see what they think. I'm so sorry, though, that it's not all there online for people to read. And the books that Sarah and I published, obviously, are available in libraries still.
Let's move on to publishing and the sort of the 80s. And Sarah, when you, I think you were abroad, weren't you? You returned to England, and then you joined the Women's Press in 1981, was it? 1980. Yes. And again, I mean, I think, I'm sort of thinking about this event, and I was thinking back to the kind of the 1980s particularly, just remembering how incredibly sexist it was. Not just, I mean, publishing was incredibly sexist, but incredibly male dominated, certainly. But the kind of the world was the society was incredibly sexist. There was a sort of knee-jerk kind of misogyny. There was so many things went unquestioned. I think, if you worked in an office, you sort of expected somebody to kind of say something or do something inappropriate at some point. It was just part of what women had to put up with. I mean, again, when you went into the women's press, when you joined the women's press, I mean, what was it? What was that about for you? Was it the next step in the publishing career, or was there a kind of strong feminist agenda for you?
Oh, very much a strong feminist agenda. And it wasn't kind of the next step in publishing, because I sort of fell into it. I mean, not exactly by accident. I mean, what had happened was that before I went off to work in Mozambique, which I did in 1978, I'd been doing various things in London. I'd been working for various international solidarity organisations, but I needed a job I needed some more money. And somebody suggested that I go and work with a woman called Stephanie Dowrick, who worked then for Granada Books, which was part of Cape Chatto and Bodley Head. And I think that she maybe started as a secretary, I can't remember. But anyway, she ran Granada. She was an extremely good editor, and she wanted somebody to work with her, and she knew somebody who knew somebody. She was a feminist, I was a feminist, and so I went along and worked for her for a bit. And she was in the process of setting up the Women's Press, of raising money for it and kind of organising it, but it hadn't yet got off the ground. And she said, when you come back from Mozambique, would you like to come and join me? So I said, yes, please. I'd really like to. I mean, it was, working with words, working with books. I mean, it just seemed kind of absolutely ideal to me. So when I came back in 1980, I went there immediately and joined her, and it was very small. I mean, it was never actually terribly big, but it was very small then. We worked out of this quite small room in Shoreditch High Street, overlooking the church. And there was about 3 of us full-time in the office, and lots of other women who came and went, who worked part-time for various reasons. Some of them had children or whatever. And I think that it was the year after that we started the book club as well, which was buying in books from other publishers, from mainstream publishers, and then sending them out through our book club. That was a great success, actually. And so then more women came in to work for that. So I can't quite remember what your first question was, but I've answered it.
Women's Press was founded in 1977, and you joined in 1980, so it was only 3 years old. It was still a very, very young company at that point. Yeah. And then Jill, you then, not long after, the year after, were involved in Sheba Publishing, which was another small independent feminist press. I wondered, obviously Women's Press had a phenomenally successful decade, didn't it? I mean, things went a bit wrong with the women's press towards the end of towards 1990, but actually to begin with, it was on such a roll. Those iconic kind of spines. You have the sort of the green Virago spines and the black and white women's press funds. I have so many books that I bought in that decade of my life, which came from those 2 presses alone. And I just wondered as well, in what way? We know that Spare Rib certainly had these very ethical standards. It wanted to be a collective. It wanted to have non-sexist advertising. Did Women's Press have similar kind of structural ethics that it was trying to challenge the conventional publishing house structure, or not really? Was that not such an issue with the Women's Press?
Well, we weren't cooperative. I don't think that was a big issue. I think the issue was much more what it was that we were publishing, and trying to kind of open out internationally. We published writers from all over the world, and had contacts with presses in other countries. So we had contacts with, for example, radical presses in the United States and Canada, but also with small presses in Zimbabwe and in India, Kali Press, I think it was called. We bought stuff in from them. So we were, so we spent a lot of time kind of, doing not co-editions, but buying in from abroad and trying to publish, women from as many countries as we possibly could.
It's actually really important.
It was successful, but also what we wanted to do, like Spare Rib, we wanted it to be, kind of attractive and the kind of thing that, that women would want to buy. So the design was very important as well.
And how conscious were you of talking to an international body of women, to women with very, very diverse experiences? Because, of course, that was one of the big criticisms levelled at second wave gender feminists, wasn't it? Was that they were too middle class, too white, too educated, and that they weren't diverse enough. Which is in a way strange, because I know that with Women's Press there were active steps to publish people from many different kinds of backgrounds, women from many different kinds of backgrounds. Do you feel that looking back, that those criticisms were in any sense justified, or do you feel a bit indignant about them?
No, I don't feel indignant about them. I mean, I think that white middle class women, have had a platform that hasn't been available to women who are not white and not middle class. I mean, I think that's absolutely a fact. When I was looking back at the kind of amazed at how wide-ranging some of the publications were. I mean, some of them I could barely even remember. I mean, there was a lot of stuff that we published. And then, of course, we also published books about class bias within the women's movement. And, so there was a kind of certainly an element of, we picked up on that element of self-criticism that was going on in the women's movement then, because, it wasn't a monolithic movement, far from it. And there were, many different and dissenting voices.
How far were you both aware of the...
Can I say something about that?
Yes, please. I was just going to ask, come to you, Jo, yeah.
Sorry, just that when Spare Rib started, we were all white on the collective, although we had a lot of contributors. Particularly a woman called Amrit Wilson used to write about Asian women in Britain, and eventually wrote a book called Finding Her Voice, which Virago published. And I worked with her a lot. She didn't actually want to be on the collective, so it wasn't a question of excluding her. She had other things she was doing and didn't want to do that. But later, in the 80s, people became much more aware of the fact that we were all white, and a lot of black women came to work at Spare Rib and also at Sheba, which was also founded, I think, at the very beginning, everybody was white. But Jackie Kay came and worked there quite early on, who's now very well known, isn't she, as a poet and a writer. Right. And what was Sheba was a much smaller press than Women's Press or Virago, and it was independently owned. And I couldn't remember, when you asked me to do this, how on earth we managed to fund ourselves. So I asked a friend, Anne Oosthuizen, who was a founder member of Sheba, who was actually at Newnham too. She's 20 years older than me, so she must have been there in the 50s. And she reminded me that we, or they, because I wasn't quite involved then, advertised through Spare Rib, asking if people could give them loans to get started. And then the other thing that helped them get started was everybody working for nothing, which is not obviously a very good idea, but sometimes it was the only way to get something to happen. Later, when the book sold, it was possible for people to pay themselves, but at the beginning there wasn't any money, so people were working for nothing. And the woman whose idea it was, a woman called Anne Decker, who's died now, unfortunately, was a designer. So she did all the design for nothing. But we had to pay printers and so on. We had an accountant who did it for virtually nothing. There was a lot of goodwill. People wanted another small press. And there were a lot of small presses. There was one called Only Women Press that was particularly for lesbian writing.
There was Pandora Press as well, wasn't there?
Yeah, there were lots of things. There was an awful lot being written, and an awful lot of people wanted to get published. And Sheba's idea, state intention, was to publish new writing and also to publish a lot of poetry, which other presses didn't quite so much because it didn't sell very well. And we published a lot of visual books. We did cartoons and books for kids. And I think possibly our first book was called Sour Cream, which was a collection of feminist cartoons. It was really good. And we did one by Jo Nesbitt of cartoons as well. And later on, Sheba became very, very consciously a mixed race collective. This was long after I'd left, a few years after I'd left, probably about 85. And it was a small group, but if there were, say, 5 people in the group, then 3 of them had to be non-white.
Were the different feminist publishing houses, did they regard each other as allies or as rivals or as a bit of both at that time?
I would say, I was going to say possibly a bit of both. I mean, I don't know how much rivalry there was. I mean, I felt that there were, I mean, the way that Jill has just described it, I mean, certainly there were quite kind of obvious differences, actually, kind of in approach and in what we published. I suppose the two most commercial, definitely the two most commercial ones were Virago and the Women's Press. And both Virago and the Women's Press, had, investment, I mean, money behind them. Although kind of editorially and in every other way, we were completely independent. But I think probably, and I'm not going to speak for Virago here, but I think we as the other kind of big commercial feminist press, we did see ourselves as being different from Virago. For example, the Virago, the Green-Spined Classics, I mean, that marvellous series that they did. I mean, they recovered, so many women from the past. It was absolute, it was kind of, I think it did change a lot of people, the way that they viewed literature. And, maybe I think it probably changed the way that literature was taught in universities as well, because these women just hadn't been known before. We didn't do that. I think we went down a more contemporary route, I would say. And we were looking for contemporary feminist writers of non-fiction and fiction. And
you at Women's Press, you published a lot of anthologies of feminist writing, didn't you?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, political.
That also
writings from the women's liberation movement, for example. But then we also did a whole series of handbooks on issues that, when I was just looking back at them and thinking, there's issues that, are still here for us today. I mean, so we published on anorexia, we published on mental health issues, we published on depression, we published on miscarriage and ectopic pregnancy, we published on ableism and disabilities. And these were all books that, were for an audience of women, because women were looking around and seeing absolutely kind of nothing that spoke to them about those particular issues. And they're certainly not issues that have gone away either.
And Sarah, you were personally responsible for developing the science fiction list at Women's Press, which was also very innovative and very important, actually. I think it's so interesting in terms of what's happened to the sci-fi fantasy literary scene since. But that was something that you really drove at the Women's Press. Why was that? Was that something that you were already interested in? When did it occur to you that it was such an exciting area?
Well, I loved science fiction. I mean, I loved science fiction and fantasy for quite a long time. I'd been a huge fan of Ursula Le Guin, for example, for ages. And in fact, you've probably forgotten this, Jill, but my first published piece of writing, I think, was about Ursula Le Guin, and it was published in Spare Rib. And I can't remember, but maybe that was through your good offices, Jill. It probably was. And that was back in 1975 or something like that. Mm-hmm. So I had been very keen on science fiction, and as I became increasingly a feminist, I became very aware of the possibilities of the political possibilities of science fiction. So then I was also at the same time teaching a course at the City Lit in feminism and science fiction. The City Lit had, for a long time, had run courses in science fiction, which were kind of terribly well known amongst the science fiction community. So I did this slightly different one, which was kind of the feminist science fiction. And I was finding that a lot of the American books, for example, that I wanted to teach just simply weren't available. They weren't in print in this country, like Joanna Russ, for example, or Susie McGee-Charnas, or Sally Miller Gerhardt. I mean, there's lots of them. So then I thought, hey, what about publishing these and then hoping to encourage British writers to experiment with fictional forms. And they did.
It's certainly a form that's really sort of ignited the imaginations of young women. I find when teaching creative writing, a lot of my students now want to do sci-fi, women students want to do sci-fi fantasy. It is like what Ursula Le Guin said, it's dancing at the edges of the world. And there is that sense that you can do whatever you want. You can make whatever world you want with sci-fi. And in a way, it was so smart of you to kind of land on that in the 80s and realize that actually how well that fitted with the kind of the feminist agenda at that time. Was it a difficult list to set up, or did people welcome it with open arms?
Well, I think that, the science fiction community in this country was very open to it, actually. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that there was any hostility. I mean, I think actually that the kind of anti-feminism that you get amongst some science fiction people is something much more recent, actually. Maybe they feel much more threatened. Maybe we didn't seem to be such a huge threat then or something. I don't know. But no, I would say that we were welcomed, even though we were saying, look, this is kind of a great genre, but much more can be done with it than you blokes have already done.
I'm just going to warn the audience that I'm going to come to you all in a moment. So if you have any questions, put them onto click on the Q&A link, and you can put your questions there, and then I'll pick them up and field them to Sarah and Jill when we get to them. So I'll just ask another couple of questions, and while you're organising your questions, one of them was I wanted to ask you was. Whether when you look back again on what you both did, the role you both played in really transforming the kind of the publishing scene in the 1970s and 80s in different ways, as a journalist publishing a magazine, as a publisher, publishers and publishing houses. I mean, what do you feel is your main achievement? What do you feel proudest of having achieved?
Jill, you go first.
I think it had been going 2 years when I joined Spare Rib, but it was quite early on, and being part of forming that, I think it's one of the best things I've ever done, really. It was a very exciting time, and I had such a lot of energy then. And when you said what was a typical day at Spare Rib, I forgot to say that, of course, we thought that, as Sarah was saying, we thought the design was fantastically important. We wanted the magazine to really stand out on the newsstands. Obviously, it couldn't be so full colour as always as some of the other magazines, but the cover was really important. And the design inside, we had a lot of pictures, a lot of cartoons. And although I was news rather than design, I always got very involved with the design. So I suppose it made sense I went into documentaries later. And when we were putting the magazine to bed, we used to stay up all night, and it was a monthly magazine. So once a month, we'd stay up literally all night and walk home or cycle home in the dawn, having sent the magazine to the printer. And there were a couple of women mainly working on design, and me. We were the main ones who did the night shift then, and I loved doing that. It was really exciting. And cut and paste that everybody does now on their computers. We literally cut and pasted. A woman used to type all the galleys, they were called, not just on a typewriter. It had a sort of golf ball thing, and she would type them up, and we would correct them, and then she'd correct them, and then we would cut them, and we would paste them with cow gum onto boards, and those boards would go off to the printer. It's like another era, isn't it? Well, it is another era.
Funny enough, though,
I don't know what cut and paste means. It's just.
Funny enough, Jill, 10 years after you were setting up Red Stocking at Cambridge, I was part of a group of women from Newnham who set up another feminist magazine called Corridor, and we were still cutting and pasting in exactly the same way with our scissors and doing it all through the night as well. So.
Breathing in all that glue.
And Sarah, what about you? What do you feel was the greatest achievement that the Women's Press did in those years?
I don't think there was one kind of particular greatest achievement. I mean, I really think that it was overall. Oh well, I suppose maybe that it was allowing to be published women who wouldn't have been published in this country houses, would have picked up the, books about living under apartheid, for instance, by South African women, or, some of those kind of, novels like Javadi Ali by Manish Shirazi about growing up in Tehran. I don't think that, that they would have been seen as being kind of publishable, whereas we did. And so I am very proud of that.
So actually that fits very nicely into a question from, it might be Una or Una. I'm not sure how you personally pronounce it, but sorry if I've got it wrong. But the question is, are there any authors whom you published that seem particularly relevant now? And are there any authors that you wish you'd been able to publish back then, but weren't able to, didn't get the chance to? I think that's a question for you both, really.
Sheba, we did a book called Girls Are Powerful. That was a really great anthology. Yeah, and had a big influence, I think.
we published, for example, Angela Davis. We published her autobiography and her book Women, Race and Class. I mean, I think that's, remains as relevant today as it was then. What else? I don't know. I mean, in terms of kind of, visions, alternative visions, something like Sally Miller Gerhardt's The Wanderground, which really kind of, just, offers a kind of a vision of a different kind of world. Or Marge Pierce's Woman on the Edge of Time, actually, the same sort of thing. I mean, it's kind of, opportunities to imagine other worlds. And I think that those kinds of books are, as relevant now as they were then, or as kind of potentially kind of liberating now as they were then.
I mean, it's an interesting question, isn't it? Whether we have to keep rediscovering. Each generation has to discover the issues for themselves, so that a lot of these books don't actually go out of fashion. Their relevance does continue, but they have to be rediscovered by each generation. Or whether progress is achieved, and actually some battles have been won. Some things we don't need to return to. Whether we're moving forwards or whether it's a sort of wave that keeps rolling round and round, and I don't know how you see it, and how do you view progress yourselves?
At Sheba, after I'd left though, because I wasn't there very long, they published Jackie Kay, obviously, and Audre, quite a lot of Black American women, Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks. They did an anthology called Charting the Journey about Black British women. And I think quite recently I saw something saying that Audre Lorde was published for the first time recently in Britain, and things do get forgotten. And it's quite good to remember that wasn't the case, that she was being published in the 80s by feminist publishers here.
There's a question for you, Jill, as well, which is, do you think there's a place for a spare rib type magazine today?
It's very difficult with the internet, I suppose, isn't it? People just don't buy magazines, do they? To the extent that they did, or newspapers. It's almost like I don't know. I think it would be harder to get a magazine out there now. They're a bit more niche now somehow, aren't they? Magazines, and
I mean there are
and people buy them because they're special, Whereas we always tried to keep the price as low as we could so it was accessible to people. I mean, we have to remember this is before the internet and before email,
And I think also for young women nowadays, I think young women are less likely to buy print magazines than they are to read stuff online. I mean, I think that's just the way that it is.
But in terms of the content, in terms of the kind of the message, the aims and the goals of Spare Rib, is there still a need for something like that online or whatever?
I think there is stuff online, isn't there? I mean, I think there are a number of young women that that blog. That I have come across them, but I can't actually remember the names off the top of my head, that do feminist kind of blogs and zines and things like that. I think the need goes on, surely.
And Spare Rib was actively committed to not being an academic magazine. There were quite a lot of those at that time too. I don't know if they were around still when you were, Rebecca, but Feminist Review and lots, and MF, I think it was called. There were a lot of journals like that, which obviously had a place, but that was not what Spare Rib wanted to be.
Having seen, publishing and media go through such a transformational phase, one question that one of the members of the audience has for you is: do you have any reflections and thoughts on the next things that should be tackled for women, for women's rights? Any specific areas that you feel really need quite urgently to be addressed, or that you would put on your agenda if you were starting now?
I still think that it's no easier for women to have children and work than it ever was, really. I mean, lots of men do much more than they did, but a lot of men don't. And it's very hard in television, it's where I work now, I think it's very hard for young women, same as it was when I was doing it. I had 2 children in my 30s and managed to carry on working in television despite having children, but it was a pretty hard balancing act with quite a lot of concealment necessary as to where you were and what you were doing. And I think
the lockdown's really exposed that, hasn't it?
Just as hard as it ever was. And then earlier you asked us what you were asking us what was sort of different. And I was thinking one of the things is housing, that in those days you could live pretty cheaply, even in London. When I was doing it anyway in the 70s, there were collective houses. I lived in collective houses where we hardly paid any money at all. And some people squatted. Some people in the women's movement managed to finance their life by not having many outgoings. And that's not possible anymore, is it? I don't know whether people could, when I said we work for nothing, obviously that was a luxury to be able to do that, but it was possible to live much more cheaply.
But I think flexible work works both ways, doesn't it? I mean, there is more flexibility in work nowadays, but I mean, I would entirely agree with you, Jill. I think that it's still very, very difficult for women with domestic responsibilities, for women with children, basically, that you end up doing kind of 5 jobs for the price of 1.
Yeah.
And it'll be very interesting to see.
You want to be involved with your children.
It'll be very interesting to see what happens post-pandemic, because the pandemic has both exposed the fact that women are still doing most of the childcare and childcare responsibilities, even when both parents are stuck at home. But the other thing it has done is it's broken the hold of the office. So it has cut through that idea that, people have to be somewhere else to work. So it may work in favour of women. It may sort of erode some of those barriers which are still in place, those differences which are still in place. I mean, I think it's quite shocking, really, isn't it, how the assumptions are still there that if there are children, women will be looking after them, and how difficult it is economically for people to change that, even if they want to.
And representation of black women and involvement in black women in running things in the media, still, things haven't changed nearly enough, have they? And there aren't these alternative things existing for people to work on instead, in mainstream publishing and in television. It's still a hell of a long way to go.
So we've hit our end of time, Mark. So I think I'm just going to sneak in one last question to you both, if I may, which is Emily asked a question, which is, if you were leaving Newnham now, what do you think you would be doing next?
Gosh.
Well, when I left Newnham back in 1974, I went and I did a whole load of different things, kind of first of all. I really felt when I left Newnham that I wanted to be doing rather than thinking and reading, although I obviously wanted to be thinking and reading as well. But I really wanted to be doing. And I suppose kind of, I still think that that's a good thing to do, to go out and kind of try this and try that and try the other, even though I do think that things are very difficult at the moment. But I think, don't kind of think, oh, well, there's only one thing that I want to do and that's what I must pursue at all costs. Kind of open yourself to many possibilities, I suppose, is what I'd say, even if that is a bit general. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, it links to what I just said about it being more difficult to do this than it used to be. But I agree with Sarah, sort of try things out, have adventures, That's what I tried to do at the time, and I didn't want to sort of go straight into an institution. I wanted to be able to create a more kind of alternative life at that time. But it's hard for people to do, not being idealistic or patronising to people. It's hard.
Well, I just want to thank you both very, very much for sharing your thoughts and your experiences and your skills and your knowledge and all the wonderful things you've done and the important things you've done for women in publishing. It's just, I think, it made a big difference. That made a big difference. And it's been a real pleasure to talk to you both today. And thank you to the audience out there who we can't see, but we're very happy that you're there. And I'd just like to say thank you from all of us to Jill and to Sarah. And thank you to Newnham for hosting this event. Wonderful Newnham. And goodbye.
Thank you.